Emma, 7 years old, vanished in just a few seconds while playing among the flowers in her garden. 6 years later, her father, consumed by guilt and obsession, discovers something chilling in the silent basement of the neighbor everyone believed to be harmless. What secrets might have stayed hidden so close by all this time? May 14, 2016 dawned with a pleasant sun over the streets of Newark, New Jersey. That Saturday promised gentle weather, perfect for outdoor activities, and the Moore family seemed ready to embrace the day. In the brick house set in a calm neighborhood, Emma Moore, 7 years old with brown curls and a distinct sparkle in her eyes, was getting ready to head out to the garden while her father, Daniel, reminded her not to wander too far. She wore a light green t-shirt and sneakers with pink laces. She'd insisted on dressing that way, to play happier, in her own words. Daniel Moore, a 38-year-old literature teacher, was in the kitchen reviewing some essays from his students at a local community college. He'd poured himself a cup of coffee and another for his wife, Laura, who sipped hers slowly while gazing at the backyard through the window. Daniel had woken up early to grade papers, though every now and then his eyes drifted lovingly to Emma, who was running back and forth dragging a worn-out doll, laughing with total abandon. The birdsong and the little girl's laughter wove together into a simple melody, creating a scene of peace nobody could have imagined would soon shatter. Laura Moore, 36, small in build, wore a tranquil expression tinged with slight fatigue. Since losing her mother the previous year, she had experienced brief depressive episodes that, while not severe, dimmed her usual energy. However, at that moment, she felt better. Seeing her daughter run around the garden, so full of life, gave her a peculiar sense of relief. Before 9 in the morning, everything seemed routine. Emma stepped out with her doll in hand and approached the fence separating the Moores' home from that of their neighbor, George Adams. Often, the girl would peek through the gaps in the wood to see if George was around. He was a retired man, about 72, who typically invited her to sit on his porch and offered her candies or handcrafted toys he made in his workshop. Daniel sipped his coffee and alternated his focus between the essays and quick glances out the window, confirming that Emma was still there, safe. At one point, Laura felt slightly dizzy and leaned on the countertop. Noticing her pale face, Daniel helped her sit in the living room, 2 rooms away, and hurried off to fetch her a glass of water. Those few minutes, maybe 5 or 7, were enough for him to get distracted caring for Laura. When he returned to the window, intending to spot Emma, Daniel didn't see her in the garden. "She's probably playing behind the rose bushes," he told himself. Yet anxiety began to gnaw at his stomach. He went outside to look for her, circled the house, called out her name, asked Laura if she'd seen her. But the girl was nowhere to be found. At first, he tried not to panic. He guessed Emma might have walked into the neighbor's house out of curiosity. So he knocked on George's door. After waiting several seconds with no response, Daniel mustered courage and stepped through the side yard where George kept his carpentry tools. There was no sign of Emma there either. Laura, seeing Daniel's alarm, walked into the yard in her slippers despite feeling dizzy. She began calling for her daughter, her tone turning more desperate each time. "Emma, where are you?" But no laughter echoed, no splashing water, nothing. The sudden silence in the yard became a threat. Both parents' hearts pounded, and with dread fueling his imagination, Daniel immediately dialed 911. He reported his daughter missing, his voice trembling, feeling that each word was an admission that something awful might have happened. Local police arrived quickly with a couple of patrol cars, spreading out around the neighborhood. A few officers approached George Adams, who appeared on the porch upon noticing the commotion, looking confused and genuinely concerned. He insisted he hadn't seen Emma that morning and had just gotten back from the market, even showing the bag of groceries. With his permission, the police checked every corner of his small house, just a couple of rooms and a porch cluttered with antiques and tools, but found no sign that Emma had been inside. By noon, volunteers and neighbors organized to search the nearby streets, the adjacent park, and the surrounding brush. Daniel led the frantic search, the image of his daughter and her doll flashing repeatedly in his mind. Neighbors tried to console him with pats on the back. George offered his help, a sad look on his face, but he felt Daniel's watchful, almost accusatory stare. As evening fell, the anguish over not finding any clues intensified. Night came, and the Moores' home filled with the flashing lights of police cars. An impromptu command center formed in the living room. Laura sat in silence, staring blankly, unable to speak, while Daniel recounted yet again how he'd found the garden empty. Each time he blamed himself a little more. If I hadn't left to help Laura with her dizzy spell, maybe I'd have seen Emma wander off. The police weren't ruling out the possibility that the girl had gone out to the street and someone had taken her. There were no decisive footprints or signs of a struggle, but fear and confusion were everywhere. Hours later, when the officers left with plans to resume the search at first light, Daniel collapsed on the couch, feeling empty, suffocated by guilt. He looked at Emma's photo, framed on the mantel, and felt his world crumble. That night, while Laura dozed fitfully from exhaustion and tears, Daniel couldn't sleep at all. His body trembled from adrenaline and despair as he replayed every second of that day in his mind, desperate to find an explanation. Nothing made sense. His little girl had vanished without a trace. Weeks passed without news. The police continued searching intensively, checking car logs and security cameras from nearby businesses. There weren't many in that residential area, but no solid leads emerged. The case got a brief burst of regional TV coverage for a few days. Neighbors gave statements, most insisting on the neighborhood's safety and the ordinary feel of that Saturday. Meanwhile, Daniel was consumed by anguish, dedicating every spare moment to distributing missing person flyers. In his study, he set up a kind of evidence board full of Emma's photos, news clippings about abductions, neighborhood maps marked with circles and arrows, and post-its scribbled with theories. He began scouring the internet for similar stories, connecting with families who'd experienced the same, joining online forums focused on missing children. Initially, Laura tried matching Daniel's intensity in the search, but her emotional health wavered. She would sink into deep depression at every turn, blaming herself for not being in her best shape that day. She cried most nights, her grief echoing through the house. Over the months, her relationship with Daniel frayed. He, unintentionally, made her feel guilty by constantly reminding her how she'd called him away just before Emma vanished. She blamed him for failing to comfort her, or offer any real hope. The distance grew until about a year after Emma's disappearance, by which time the police had drastically scaled back resources. Laura decided to leave. She packed some clothes, said a quick goodbye, and told Daniel she needed space to process her pain far from that mental hellhole the house had become without Emma. The couple soon divorced, rushing the paperwork in the midst of their shared frustration. Left alone, Daniel sank deeper into his fixation. He quit teaching, claiming he couldn't focus on anything else, and survived off savings and small online tutoring gigs. Whenever local or state police announced that a missing child had been located anywhere in the state, Daniel would show up, hopeful it was Emma. He was always disappointed. About a year after the incident, around May 2017, Daniel, in sheer desperation, was scouring the garden with a metal detector, convinced any method might help. While doing so, he spotted something shiny among the grass, near the fence separating his yard from George Adams's. Approaching, he found a small child's bracelet made of colored beads, the very one Emma always wore. A homemade gift from Laura, with a little heart charm engraved with the letter E. Holding that bracelet filled Daniel with a painful mix of hope and sorrow. How had it ended up there? Had Emma dropped it while sneaking away? Had it been hidden in the weeds for a whole year without anyone noticing? Or had someone placed it there recently, either to incriminate or mislead? The discovery reignited Daniel's suspicions about George. From day one, Daniel had sensed something off about him, but formally, George had been very cooperative and polite. Police had interrogated him shortly after Emma vanished, finding no proof of wrongdoing. He had returned to living quietly. Daniel reported the bracelet to the police, who reacted with little enthusiasm. They took it for analysis, hoping for DNA traces, but given the time elapsed and its deteriorated condition, results were inconclusive. George was questioned again and denied any knowledge of the bracelet's origin, still insisting on his innocence. Even so, this set Daniel's obsession ablaze. He began watching George more intensely than ever. From his study window, using binoculars, he spent hours observing the neighbor's garden, porch, movements with his tools or car. He jotted down each detail in a notebook. Hour 9:12 through 17, 6:00 p.m. George takes out big trash bags. Hour 9:20 to 17, 7:15 a.m. George leaves in his truck, returns 9:00 a.m. with no apparent purchases, and so on. Yet nothing he saw truly incriminated the man. Neighbors grew uneasy around Daniel, whispering that he was losing it, that he couldn't accept the idea of Emma having run away or been abducted without a clear lead. The police also stopped giving his calls much attention, except for one person, Detective Ava Mitchell. Ava, 34, had been with the local police department for 6 years and was known for doggedly reopening cold cases. She'd grown up in Newark. Her own grandmother had disappeared decades before in a case never solved, fueling her persistence in investigations. Ava kept in touch with Daniel, listening to his theories. While lacking solid evidence, she trusted his powerful intuition. Still, without proof, she couldn't formally go after George. Instead, she offered Daniel emotional support and encouraged him to remain calm. Daniel's obsession only grew. Since finding Emma's little bracelet near the fence behind George Adams' backyard, Daniel's mind found no rest. Something about that proximity, about the neighbor's seemingly innocent facade, triggered a dark foreboding in him. Gradually, he set aside any lingering doubts and threw himself into searching relentlessly for proof against George. Armed with intense determination, Daniel spent countless hours digging through libraries, local archives, and digital records. He uncovered old newspaper clippings mentioning George in small neighborhood pieces, plus an obscure interview in a collector's magazine where George talked about rare antiques and forgotten items he kept in his basement. But the most unsettling discovery was a black and white photo of George smiling alongside his late wife Mary in front of a table strewn with odd collectible items, antique dolls, carved boxes, old-fashioned toys. Daniel stared at that image until a chill ran down his spine. Every piece of data fed his suspicion that George Adams wasn't as innocent as he seemed. Daniel's imagination even conjured the possibility that George might have secret connections with child trafficking networks, an idea that robbed him of sleep. Nights became endless and suffocating. Alone in the house that once echoed with Emma's laughter, Daniel felt only desperation whispering through every room. Night after night, Daniel obsessively revisited Emma's belongings: dusty dolls, colorful drawings, neatly folded children's clothes still hanging in her closet. Her room remained exactly as she'd left it that fateful morning. Emma's absence haunted him like a ghost, looming in each dark corner, each silence, each breeze tapping lightly on the windows. During one such painful vigil, Daniel found a drawing of Emma tucked in an old sketch pad. It was a simple picture with firm crayon strokes, showing her playing on George's front porch. Daniel's stomach turned. He remembered how friendly the elderly neighbor had always been with Emma, how he used to give her carved wooden toys, like that little wooden airplane Emma loved flying around the yard, or a jigsaw puzzle she assembled over and over until she knew it by heart. Those once innocent memories now felt sinister, filling Daniel's troubled mind with dark hints. Why? Won't anyone see this? He muttered repeatedly, voice low and shaky with frustration. Why can't the police see it's so obvious? The question hammered at his conscience, day in and day out. And as his suspicion escalated, so did the distance between Daniel and the rest of the neighborhood, which had begun to notice his cold, distrustful glances whenever he and George happened to lock eyes in the street. Meanwhile, George Adams continued living quietly, seemingly unaware of the storm of suspicion swirling around him. He spent long hours in the basement workshop, patiently restoring some newly acquired antique. He kept his objects neatly organized: old lamps, carved boxes, faded wooden toys, even porcelain dolls with empty gazes staring from the shelves. Occasionally, he sold some items at flea markets to supplement his income, greeting passers-by with a friendly smile that suggested nothing of hidden secrets. He maintained a near-pristine appearance, combed white hair slicked back, thin-framed, glasses perched on his nose, and a gentle, affable face that seemed incapable of harboring dark deeds. No one would have guessed that behind that peaceful persona lay Daniel's imagined villain, responsible for snatching his daughter away. Sometimes, George would approach Daniel in the street, politely greeting him or asking with apparent concern if there was any news on Emma's case. But Daniel, unable to hide his distrust, responded with curt words and avoided eye contact, as though fearing any deeper exchange might collapse the fragile composure he clung to. Each brief encounter only intensified his tension. In the following nights, Daniel replayed each of George's words, searching for contradictions or a damning clue that might finally prove his guilt. As time crawled on, Daniel practically abandoned all social life. His friends stopped visiting, alarmed by his unhealthy fixation. But he had neither time nor energy for anything besides investigating George. He even installed a camera in his window to keep a constant watch on the neighbor's entrance. Every seemingly insignificant detail, unusual schedules, unexpected guests, mysterious items George carried from his truck to the basement, was meticulously logged in a notebook, waiting for something that would confirm Daniel's fears. Yet the wait was agonizingly long. Days felt like years, Daniel's mental and physical health crumbling under relentless anxiety. Even so, he clung fiercely to his obsession, convinced that was the only way to solve Emma's disappearance. He had no idea that, very soon, the unbearable waiting would end, and he would stumble upon something even darker and more horrifying in that supposedly harmless basement next door. 6 long years had passed since Emma vanished from her garden that fateful morning. It was now 2022, and in Newark, her name had slowly faded from everyday conversations. For most, Emma Moore was just a distant memory, an old tragedy. Many assumed the girl was no longer alive. Her case had gone cold, filed away in police archives. Like so many other unresolved disappearances, Laura Moore couldn't bear living in that sorrowful house any longer. After the divorce, she moved to Philadelphia, hoping to start fresh. Her days revolved around painting abstract canvases, dark colors reflecting sleepless nights and bottomless grief. Sometimes she and Daniel spoke on the phone, brief, intense conversations more governed by guilt than comfort. Daniel, on the other hand, flat out refused to leave the house that once made him so happy with his wife and daughter. He lived sealed inside his obsession, devoting every waking moment to chasing any clue about Emma. He survived by selling old books and offering online tutoring sessions. In the solitude of his study, he pored over photos, newspaper clippings, and random objects once belonging to his daughter, searching for answers to questions no one else seemed to ask. His only steady ally was Detective Ava Mitchell, who patiently took his repeated calls and followed up on leads that usually went nowhere. Though she never explicitly said so, Ava admired Daniel's grit and courage, all the while worrying that his obsession was destroying him. One sweltering July night, Daniel was in the darkness of his study, organizing documents, when something caught his eye on the other side of the street. Glancing up, he saw something strange at George Adams' place. George, moving anxiously, was unloading a heavy black bag from the trunk of his old pickup. Daniel's heart pounded. An inner alarm blared in his mind. He grabbed his binoculars for a closer look. George's expression was tense, strangely grim. Checking his surroundings as though worried about being spotted, he hauled the sack toward the basement door. Daniel gritted his teeth, remembering that bracelet found near the fence 6 years prior. He felt his suspicions coming to a head. Unable to wait any longer, he slipped out of his house and snuck quietly toward George's property. The street was empty, lights off in neighbors' homes. The silence magnified every footstep. He hopped the fence, staying low behind the shrubs until he reached a small, half-buried window leading into the basement. Daniel pressed his face to the grimy glass, wiping away some dust. Through the dim reflection, he glimpsed shadowy shapes, George presumably, lit by a small lamp as he opened a large wooden box. "What the heck are you up to, George?" Daniel whispered, feeling his pulse skyrocket. Driven by desperation, Daniel darted around to the basement's back door. He turned the doorknob. To his surprise, it opened. George, in his haste, must have forgotten to lock it. Daniel inched inside. The damp air, steeped in the smell of old wood and varnish, filled his lungs. He stepped carefully, aware each movement seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. He soon reached a corner stacked with dusty boxes. His breath was rapid and uneasy. One box stood slightly ajar, catching his attention. Approaching slowly, he felt his heart freeze when he saw something pink inside. With trembling hands, he reached for it, a child's pink sneaker with frayed laces. "Emma," Daniel whispered, a cold shudder running down his spine. Tears filled his eyes as he continued rummaging anxiously through the box. He found a pink hair bow, a small handwriting workbook labeled Emma Moore on the cover, and finally a photograph of his daughter smiling, hugging the doll he'd once given her for her birthday. An overwhelming rage mixed with agony overtook him. "That filthy old man," he muttered, tears running down his cheeks. "What did you do to my little girl?" Just then, he heard hurried footsteps descending the basement stairs. A sudden blinding light hit him. George stood at the bottom step, flashlight in hand, his face a twisted mix of shock and fury. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" George demanded, voice shaking. "How did you get in?" Daniel's voice quavered with anger as he stood, clutching Emma's sneaker in his fist. "Where is Emma?" "George, what did you do to her?" George took half a step back, rattled. "You have no right. You don't know," he stammered, refusing to meet Daniel's eyes. "You're a lying snake." "Then why do you have all this?" Daniel roared, pointing to the box. "Tell me what happened to my daughter." I can't tell you anything," George cried, desperation filling his voice. Daniel stepped forward, determined not to let him escape. But in a burst of adrenaline, the older man darted up the stairs with shocking speed, slamming the heavy door behind him. Daniel heard the latch turn, locking him inside. "George, open the door now. Open up, you maniac," Daniel shouted, banging the door with all his might, feeling his helplessness rise. "You'll pay for this." He could hear frantic footsteps above, then another loud thud, like George was barricading the door from the outside. Daniel slumped against it, defeated. He pulled out his phone, desperately searching for a signal, but there was none. Battery was down to 10%. Panic ratcheted higher. "Please, someone help me," he murmured, voice cracking in the stale, hot air of the basement. He glanced around at the trove of boxes, each containing more horrifying secrets. Darkness loomed thicker every second. Daniel realized he was trapped right where the truth of Emma's disappearance lay hidden. Exhausted, he pounded on the door one last time, screaming in frustration before lapsing into silence, his ragged breathing echoing in the gloom. Upstairs, George Adams paced anxiously, hands shaking, lungs heaving. He stopped by the landline phone, picked up the receiver, and dialed with unsteady fingers. "It's me. There's a problem," he whispered into the phone, staring in terror at the locked basement door. "Daniel knows too much. We have to handle this now." He hung up slowly, gaze still fixed on that basement door, aware that his secret could no longer remain hidden. While Daniel remained trapped below, George fumbled around upstairs. Occasionally, Daniel heard him pacing or making phone calls. He had no idea who George was trying to reach. Time became meaningless. Could have been minutes or hours. With only a tiny, dirty window for faint light, the basement had no easy escape. The thick air stank of dust and varnish, and the heat grew suffocating. Daniel tried to keep calm. Searching the area with a flashlight he found on a shelf, he discovered more boxes of old toys, rag dolls, pictures of children he didn't recognize. An icy dread washed over him. Emma wasn't the only child connected to these items. On a shelf, he discovered a scrapbook of old newspaper clippings, almost all about children who'd gone missing in past decades. The title on the cover read "Bright Kids Foundation." A spike of fear jabbed Daniel's chest. He couldn't fathom how George fit into such horrifying activity. Exhaustion began to overwhelm him. Unsure how long he'd been there, he sat on the floor against the wall, sweat beading on his brow. He thought of Detective Ava Mitchell, the one cop who still believed in him. He silently prayed someone would notice his absence and come looking, in time. Across the street, now well into the night, some neighbors noticed the lights were still on at George's place. Odd for the old man, but not alarming enough to call the cops. Sometime after midnight, though, Ava Mitchell got a cryptic text message from Daniel. "Think I found something at George's house. Urgent." It was short and frantic. When Ava tried replying, no answer came. Worried, she showed up at Daniel's place early the next morning, but it was empty. No trace of him. Next, she visited George Adams's house and knocked. George answered, looking weary, insisting he hadn't seen Daniel and had slept all night. He claimed no knowledge of any texts. However, Ava immediately sensed something off in George's demeanor. He was jumpier than usual, avoiding her gaze. She phoned the station to report Daniel missing, requesting backup. Another patrol car arrived to question George formally, but the elderly man stuck to his story of innocence. Ava wasn't buying it. She pressured her colleagues to search the house, but George refused entry. By law, they needed a warrant, so Ava left frustrated, but not ready to give up. As hours ticked by, her suspicions grew. She recalled all the times Daniel had called about the neighbor. What if Daniel was right? She wondered. He's not the type to cook up stories out of thin air. Acting on her gut feeling, she petitioned a local judge, presenting the clues, Emma's bracelet, Daniel's urgent text, to secure a search warrant. After some hours and her persistent persuasion, the judge finally signed it. A small police team returned to George's place. While one officer confronted George, at the front door, Ava and another colleague circled around back and forced their way into the basement. Descending the stairs, they found Daniel slumped in a corner, grimy and shaken. At the sight of them, he broke into sobs of relief. "Over here. I found Emma's stuff. Her sneaker," he managed to say, his voice trembling. Seeing Daniel trapped there, the officers promptly detained George, who protested that they'd made a mistake, that Daniel had broken into his home illegally. Ava and the team dismissed his protests. Even in his weakened state, Daniel directed them to the damning boxes and photos. Ava was horrified by what she saw. They hauled George in for questioning. The station's interrogation room had harsh fluorescent lighting and an atmosphere as thick as fog. Ava Mitchell meticulously spread out the evidence from George Adams' basement. Photographs, worn-out toys, old newspaper articles, letters scrawled in pencil. Everything pointed to something far bigger and more disturbing than Emma Moore's disappearance. Ava paused over a small notebook. Inside was a bank account number scribbled next to a faded logo for an unknown organization called Bright Kids Foundation. A chill pricked Ava's skin. She realized they were dealing with a massive, sinister operation. "What exactly did you find down there?" Officer Jenkins asked, stepping closer, his tone grim. "A whole network, Jenkins. This is huge," Ava replied in a low voice, flipping through the pages. "These disappearances stretch back decades. It's not just Emma." Meanwhile, in another part of the station, Daniel sat anxiously, wringing his hands. His exhausted, gaunt face revealed a mix of anguish and hope. As George Adams was escorted by two officers down the hallway, Daniel's eyes burned with rage. The older man refused to look his way. When the interrogation finally started, Ava entered with cool determination. George slumped in his chair, head bowed, avoiding her gaze. Moments passed in suffocating silence until Ava spoke abruptly. "George, we have everything we need to put you away for life," she began in an icy voice. "But right now, what matters most is Emma Moore. Where is she?" Slowly, George raised his head, revealing a worn face lined by the stress of recent hours. "I don't know exactly where she is," he croaked. "I never did. It wasn't my job to know." Ava slammed the table, startling him. "Don't you dare lie, George. Tell me what happened that night. What did you do with Emma?" George inhaled sharply, as if gathering the courage to speak. His eyes shone with repressed tears, though his voice was still detached, almost robotic. "I was in trouble, you get it? After Mary died, I was alone, drowning in debt. Those people, offered me a way out. I just had to tip them off whenever I saw a good opportunity. Vulnerable kids, distracted parents. They handled the rest. Ava swallowed the urge to lash out and instead asked carefully, "Who are they?" "I never knew their real names," George said, staring at the floor. "I just got paid. I'd make a call or send a message whenever there was a chance. They grabbed the kids and vanished." A wave of revulsion hit Ava. She hesitated, then pressed on. "Tell me about Emma. What exactly happened?" George sighed, voice quivering with guilt. "That morning I saw her by the fence. Her dad was busy. It was easy. I called my contact, gave them the location. They took her in a white van near the park. That's all I know. They said she'd go to a wealthy family, that she'd be better off." "And the belongings? Why keep them?" Ava demanded. George shrugged weakly. "I'm not sure. Maybe to remind me of what I'd done. Maybe I just couldn't forget her." Behind the observation window, Daniel heard every word, his dread and rage peaking. Unable to hold back, he barged into the room before anyone could stop him. "You sick bastard. How could you do that to Emma? She trusted you." Officers intervened, restraining Daniel from striking George. Daniel struggled, tears streaming down his face, voice cracking with desperation. "Tell me where she is. Tell me." "The truth." George met Daniel's eyes for the first time, voice trembling. "She's not around here. Probably living under another name in some faraway place. It's been 6 years. She might not even remember who she used to be." Daniel let out a strangled cry. "You monster!" As officers pulled him out of the room, Ava, forcing down her own anger, turned back to George. "I need names, George. Any lead you can give us. It's your only shot at a reduced sentence." Looking thoroughly defeated, George mumbled, "In the notebook." "Track that account. It's under something called the Bright Kids Foundation. The network's huge, very powerful. Watch your backs." Ava felt the weight of those words crash onto her. She left the interrogation cell, knowing it all depended on tracing that bank account. On her way out, she placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I can't promise miracles, Daniel, but we've got a real lead now. We'll look for Emma, I swear." In the days that followed, Ava and her team worked tirelessly with state and federal authorities. They traced bank transactions, dug up every detail on the mysterious foundation, and uncovered a chain of illegal adoptions. Meanwhile, Daniel lived in an agonizing limbo, waiting for any news of Emma. He kept telling himself his daughter had to still be alive, remembering her resilience and bright spirit. But the uncertainty was cruel, each passing hour torturing his already worn-out soul. Late one night, as Ava sifted through files, she received a phone call from an unlisted number. A hushed voice on the other end said, "Detective Mitchell, I know where the girl is, the one you're looking for. I know where Emma Moore is, but you better move fast. They know you're onto them." Ava's heart froze. She swallowed hard and answered firmly, "Who is this? Where's Emma?" The line went dead. Ava stood there in a moment of stunned silence, fully aware they were closing in on the truth, and that time was running out. With George Adams behind bars, media interest in Emma's case exploded once more. Local stations revisited the story of the missing girl from 2016, along with the shocking confession of the neighbor. Viewers were horrified at the suggestion of a large-scale criminal network. Under intense coverage, the police hotline lit up with tips and leads. After cross-referencing data, Ava uncovered adoption paperwork that looked suspicious in a nearby city called Edison. The adoptive family's surname, Donovan, appeared in documents riddled with red flags. The adopted child's name was Olivia Donovan, with a birth date that lined up with Emma's current age. The official photo didn't exactly match Emma. 6 years can change a lot, but the timing and other details were suspicious. Ava and a police team headed to the Donovans' luxurious mansion. The family, wealthy and involved in real estate, claimed ignorance of any fraud. They insisted a legal intermediary had simplified the process. Though outwardly cooperative, they were visibly uneasy. In a spacious living room adorned with pricey art, Ava and 2 officers sat down with Olivia, a 13-year-old girl. Her hair was longer and straighter than Daniel remembered Emma's, yet her hazel eyes were strikingly familiar. those same thoughtful eyes Emma once had. Nervous, Olivia seemed confused about why the police wanted to talk to her. When Ava asked about her childhood, the girl gave vague answers, insisting she'd always lived with the Donovans. She admitted she didn't recall anything before she was 6 or 7, stumbling over details. Ava decided to bring her to the Newark station for a more thorough check. The Donovans complied, worried about negative publicity. That's where the face-to-face meeting with Daniel happened. When the teenager walked in and saw this tearful man, she felt something stir inside her. Daniel, hands trembling, gently spoke. "Emma, honey, I've been looking for you for so many years." The girl stared into his eyes, that voice sparking faint memories. She didn't immediately recognize him. She said quietly, "I don't understand. My parents are the Donovans." But Ava showed her photos from her early childhood, wearing a favorite dress, hugging the same doll, or practicing writing her name. The teen started crying, overwhelmed as long-lost memories began surfacing. Suddenly she broke into sobs and whispered, "I remember a garden with yellow flowers. I remember a man reading me stories." Daniel embraced her, carefully, afraid of scaring her. His voice cracked. "I'm your dad, Daniel Moore." They wept together, overwhelmed, while the teen blinked through tears, struggling to grasp her reality. As she answered more questions, she described fragments of her abduction: a gray-haired man picking her up at night, a long car ride, multiple moves, and eventually settling in this new house where they said her name was Olivia. Over time, she blocked out old memories and adapted to her new life, though always sensing something was off. The Donovans, interviewed by the police, swore they had no idea about the criminal origins of the adoption. They insisted they'd paid a firm called Roswell and Associates to expedite everything. Even so, they faced charges of illegal adoption and fraudulent documentation as accessories, whether knowingly or not. The final reunion between Daniel and Emma Olivia at the precinct felt like the close of a 6-year nightmare. Daniel took her hand, tears in his eyes, saying, "I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you." She hugged him back, feeling a warmth she'd never known in the Donovan home, a sudden flash of real belonging. It wasn't immediate magic. She had to adjust to the huge revelations, but tears from both father and daughter suggested a new start was possible. In the following days, Laura rushed from Philadelphia to Newark upon learning Emma was alive. The mother-daughter reunion was emotional yet tense. 13-year-old Emma was overwhelmed. Laura sobbed as she and Daniel shared their guilt for letting all these years slip by. But relief overshadowed the sorrow, because they had Emma back. With the link to George Adams, authorities dismantled a big chunk of the criminal organization. George was formally charged with aiding kidnappers and concealing information in multiple child disappearances. He faced a lengthy trial and was denied bail. Further investigations tracked banking records, exposing other key players. More children, living under fake identities, were recovered. Detective Ava Mitchell was honored for her persistence, hailed as a department hero. She, however, downplayed her personal achievement in interviews, emphasizing that the true victory was reuniting a family. She warned of the importance of revisiting cold cases and trusting the instincts of desperate loved ones. For the Moores, Daniel, Laura, and Emma, piecing their lives back together proved a delicate challenge. Emma needed therapy and time to heal. At 13, she felt torn between loyalty to the Donovans, who had raised her, albeit under criminal circumstances, and a budding love for her real parents. Ultimately, she chose to reconnect with her true history. Daniel vowed never to push, promising to walk beside her at every step and respect her pace. Laura, seeing Daniel's devotion to rebuilding their daughter's life, felt a renewed fondness for him. They didn't jump right back into marriage, but they rebuilt a caring bond as parents. The Newark home, largely unchanged in 6 years, now felt different with Emma back. Familiar furniture became symbols of hope rather than reminders of tragedy. Gradually, Emma recalled more details of her old life. The soup Laura used to make, her favorite, the recliner where Daniel read her poems, the backyard with bright yellow. flowers where she used to bury treasures, coins or little plastic figures. Sometimes she'd break down crying, grieving lost years and wondering why she'd been torn from her real home. A pivotal moment came one afternoon when Daniel gently asked, "Emma, if you prefer, I can call you Olivia. I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know your name is so special to me." She studied his face, then took his hand. "I want you to call me Emma." Daniel gathered her into his arms, feeling that in that instant, the barrier erected over years of separation finally fell. She moved back in with him, with Laura frequently visiting. The Donovans, plagued by guilt, cooperated with the investigation, conceding Emma's custody without a legal battle. From that point on, life became about rebuilding. With help from Ava and a solid therapy team, the Moore family began the slow process of healing. Media coverage eventually eased off now that the case had a hopeful conclusion. Scars remained, and the trauma wouldn't simply vanish, but the future seemed brighter now that Emma was safe at home. Daniel came to terms with how much of his life he'd lost to guilt and obsession. Now, with Emma returned, he allowed himself some self-forgiveness for not having protected her that tragic morning in 2016. He reached out to his old university job, contemplating a return to teaching. Laura poured her heart into painting again, not as an escape, but as a way to express thankfulness. Over time, Emma described more of her memories, the people who took her, the long drives, how she was ultimately placed with the Donovans, who never harmed her physically but hid her true identity. Her testimony helped the police track down more of the network's members. Meanwhile, George Adams wasted away in prison, suffering ill health. In a final hearing, he spoke feebly about regret, blaming his greed and loneliness for terrible decisions and pleading for forgiveness. His words left Daniel cold. He could never forgive the man who caused Emma's 6-year absence. Several months later, the Moores held a small gathering in their backyard, the very place where Emma disappeared years earlier. Balloons filled the lawn, the girl, now 13, chatting and laughing with new friends she'd met in a support group. Laura fixed homemade lemonade while Daniel, smiling shyly, watched from the sidelines. That gathering signaled a fresh beginning. Emma, despite her emotional scars, rediscovered the joys of childhood. She had a bit of schoolwork to catch up on, but her curiosity and flair for art helped her push forward. Laura and Daniel, though living apart as adults, had found a way to be a united front as parents. Ava Mitchell, honored guest, received heartfelt hugs. Her presence reminded them all how crucial persistence had been. Though the memory of 6 missing years would never vanish entirely, and the trauma would forever leave its mark, each of them learned to carry that pain as part of their shared story. At least they'd found some peace in finally bringing home the little girl who once stepped out into the garden and never came back. In time, Emma told her story publicly, emphasizing how her father's unwavering determination led to her return. While she didn't fully recall every murky detail of her abduction, she no longer feared the unknown. She felt whole again with her real parents by her side. Despite all the darkness, the light of truth had ultimately prevailed.